I was looking at my favorite app to find free items being given away in my area when I saw the ad for this blower. It was about 8 miles from me, and I was able to see it shortly after it was posted, so my chances of getting there first was pretty good. Now you have to be pretty quick, otherwise someone else is going to get the item before you do. And as you can tell, it is kind of rough, but later on we're going to find out that there's a nasty surprise waiting for us. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this Echo blower, and the problem is that I just picked it up and I'm not really sure what's wrong with it. Of course, most of the time when someone gives something away for free, there's a really good chance that there's going to be a problem with it. And with a leaf blower like this one, I'm sure it's going to have quite the challenge to getting it working again. Now, I'm going to try and repair this leaf blower, but yours might be different, so this might not work on yours. So if things are not working out for you, like in this video, please ask about it and I'll be glad to answer your questions. Well, it turns out the commenters were right about the blower tube not being the correct one for it. In fact, if we get this blower working again, we'll have to see about getting the blower tubes replaced on it. So as you can tell, there is some fuel in the tank, but after taking a look at it, it doesn't look right. However, after pouring it out, I do believe there is 2-stroke oil in it, but I can't really tell how old it is. Now, depending upon what kind of oil you use, it may not change the color of the gasoline by much. Also, while we're here, we can also check on the condition of the fuel line and the filter. And surprisingly, the fuel line and filter are in great condition, meaning we won't have to worry about replacing them unless you really want to. I guess since we've taken out the questionable fuel from the tank, we might as well put some fresh fuel in it, purge the system, choke the carb, and then try starting it. So besides a broken choke lever, I think we know why they gave this blower away. It's not going to do any kind of work if it's acting like that. As you just saw, the air filter was clean of any debris and was not wet with any fuel either. A restricted intake system could cause this problem, but since this one is clear, we'll have to move on to the next possible cause, which is a clogged spark arrestor screen. Now, even though the screen is most likely the cause, I'd still be more comfortable taking the carb off for an inspection. I'm also going to give this blower a quick spray and rinse since it was quite dirty around the fuel tank area. I also took off that blower tube and the plastic cover over the air inlet to give it a thorough cleaning. And whoever took this cover off before did a bang up job bending all the clips, which are now damaged and beyond saving. I'm not going to worry about those clips right now, but I would like to put it back on because it's supposed to be there. While checking out the cover, I noticed something. The spark arrestor screen in the muffler was already gone. Now this is important because what typically gets clogged up in the exhaust is this screen, but with it gone, it can't be the problem then, and it might just be the carb instead. But it does make our job just a little bit easier. We'll then disconnect the fuel lines and remove the carb and see what it looks like on the inside. Now to be quite honest, I am quite happy to get a chance to work on one of these newer Echo blowers. In fact, they still offer this model at the local hardware store, which doesn't happen all the time for me. So the first hurdle that we have to deal with is this gasket. Normally, I would just leave it alone while I worked on the carb, but this one is extremely large and will get in the way. And as much as I hate to do it, I'm going to have to remove it, but unfortunately, it's not going to leave without a fight and falls apart while doing it. I'm also going to remove the plastic cap over the high-speed fuel adjustment screw, that way we can make adjustments to it later on. Now you can do this afterwards, but I find it a lot easier doing it right now. There's also a plastic cap covering the low-speed screw too, so we'll take care of that as well. Now to make our fuel adjustments, we need to get the engine running first, meaning we don't need to touch them until then. Also, you don't need any special tools, but you will need a small flathead screwdriver though. Next, we'll take off the purge bulb, then we'll get access to the screw that holds the pumping section to the carb. Now the purge bulb is starting to discolor a little bit, and even though it'll probably last for another couple of years, I'd rather change it now. So this is the pumping diaphragm, but this is not the part that I'm concerned with the most, and that's mainly because we already know the carb works. Now the part that I'm concerned about the most is actually the metering diaphragm, which is under this metal plate. So first off, it does have some wrinkles on it, but it won't matter that much unless it's begun to harden up. But the strange part is that the diaphragm is still very flexible, which doesn't make sense. The only other thing that might be wrong with it is the fact that it is a bit crooked. I know it's really tough to tell, but the stem portion in the middle is not level with the surface for the plate and could be the cause of our problem. Now, to be completely honest, I don't think this is the main reason for the blower not getting to full speed, but it is a step in the right direction and it won't hurt it to replace it, and then we can make our carb adjustments later on. Now, you can just order the metering diaphragm individually, which is great news. It means you won't have to order a whole rebuild kit only to use the metering diaphragm from it. But if you end up breaking the gasket for the diaphragm, you might be out of luck, and I'm not sure if you can order just the gasket without ordering the entire kit. But for right now, we're just going to replace the crooked diaphragm and the purge bulb and hope that with some carb adjustments, we'll be able to get the engine to run a whole lot better. Of course, if you don't want to go through all this work, I'd recommend replacing the carb with an aftermarket one. However, if you're concerned about putting a cheap aftermarket carb on your Echo machine, then just buy an OEM carb instead. But I do have to let you know that a new OEM carb will be very expensive in comparison to an aftermarket one. So what are we going to do about that broken gasket for the carb then? Well, I don't seem to have the exact gasket, but I do have this one. And for the most part, it seems like it's going to work, except for the small opening for the impulse signal, which is in the wrong location. Now, that's not too big of an issue. We'll just put a new opening in the correct location and we should be good. Once that's been taken care of, we'll then start to put the carb back onto the engine, making sure that the fuel lines are correctly installed. Now, on this particular carb, the fuel filter line will connect to the port on the right side. And of course, that means the return line will connect to the port on the left. And after stabbing the bolts through the air box and then the carb, don't forget to install that modified gasket. Now, if you wanted to, you could just glue the gasket to the back of the carb or onto the engine side just to make it a little bit easier when installing it. And if you wanted to, you could also just keep using that modified gasket, otherwise you can order the correct one. That means, as of right now, we need to order both blower tubes, a gasket for the carb, and a new airbox to fix that broken choke arm. I don't know if you've been keeping tabs on the cost so far, but the total for all that stuff is just shy of $100, and that's before taxes. It goes without saying, this blower is not even worth that much on the used market, so I doubt I'm going to invest $100 into it. Now, I do plan on buying the first blower tube, but I'm hesitating on the second one unless I can find a good deal on it. I also want to take a look at that spark plug and make sure that there are no problems with it, and initially, I don't see anything wrong with it. The only real problem is that there's a lot of carbon on it, which means either they mixed too much oil in their fuel, or they didn't use the blower at full speed much and let it idle for too long, causing excess carbon to build up. To be honest, the carbon is not that bad, but before we put it back in, I do want to check and make sure the gap is set at 25 thousandths of an inch, which it was. Once the spark plug is back in, we'll tighten it down, replace the boot, and then try and start it. Hopefully it runs a whole lot better, and if not, we'll try and make some adjustments. Well, the bad news is that it's still not getting to full speed, and the terrible news is that adjusting the carb didn't help at all. That's why I stopped making any further adjustments. So I'm thinking that the exhaust is still blocked, but not by the missing screen, but at the source, meaning the exhaust port on the engine. I think the last person who was trying to work on this machine also thought the same thing about the spark arrestor screen being clogged and just removed it, only to find out that it was still having the same issue and just stopped it right there, calling it a lost cause instead. Now, to get to the exhaust port, we need to take off the rear cover and then the muffler. Just be very careful when taking these bolts out for the muffler because one of these was really fighting back and I ended up having to chase those threads later on. Now, we'll need to get a closer look at the port to see if it's even clogged up. But when we do get closer, it's very apparent that the port is clogged up with a lot of carbon. In fact, there's only a small opening for the exhaust to escape the engine. That's why it was so quiet when it was running. So here's the problem. How do you want to go about clearing that port? Well, nothing beats a good scraping. Now, it is up to you how you want to do this, but for me, I'm just going to make sure the piston is all the way up. Then I'm just going to scrape the carbon away, followed by some carb cleaner, but this method may not be what's best for your machine. So this method has the potential to scratch the side of the piston, and if they're too deep, you might end up doing more harm than good. And as you can see, the port is now a whole lot clearer than it was just a couple of minutes ago. Once that's done, we'll then put it back together, start it back up, and see if our cleaning made any sort of difference to the performance. Now that was a whole lot better, but I did have to see if making any adjustments to the H screw would make it any better. But in the end, I basically put the screw right back to where I found it. Now don't worry, I'll need to do more cold starts after this bit of tuning. And I think that's the part that most consumers don't like about doing this kind of repair work. It's not over when it's over, there's always more checking and tweaking afterwards. Now as for this one, I think the fuel had way too much oil in it, and that's why the engine wasn't burning it and instead turning it into a carbon mess that got stuck in the exhaust port. So my question is, this blower is running the way that it sits, so do we need to invest more money into it? Or would you just leave it the way that it is instead?
Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.